All right, this is the sixth and final class of Retreating in Place. Although, after we take a break next Wednesday, remember we're taking a break next Wednesday, we will start the meditation class. To finish up as best we can tonight, we went through on page 2 of 3, on the second page of the outline, the program section. We had gone through number 4. So we talked about silence and solitude, intentional spirituality, and we talked about number 4, community, and especially community in conjunction with accountability. As we're building this program for ourselves, the good news is you really only have to focus on 2 things. And we talked about the 5 things: community, accountability, structure, discipline, and service, right? But really what you need to focus on is community and structure. The community we talked about last week, it can be any group of people that you invest enough in, that you are vulnerable, open, honest, dropping your defenses enough with, that you can actually have someone be able to be connected to you and accountable to you and you to them. So, and you're not going to necessarily get your accountability from one group. So it can be a combination of church and program and work and school. It could be hobby groups and hiking groups. It can be a lot of different things that you are invested enough in and close enough in that you're actually connecting. That's going to be your ground for possible service as you move forward, and we'll talk about service in a minute here. So if you are in those kinds of groups, family groups, whatever it happens to be, you're not isolated and you're connected with them, that is that fertile ground for community and for accountability. But you also need to have a structure. You need to have some sort of structure that you are working with, in, and through. Part of that structure is going to be provided for you in terms of if you're part of these groups. If it's work, very strict structure, of course, that you're getting paid for. But if they're any type of group, there's going to be a structure there that is given to you. You decide whether you're going to submit to it or not. But what we're talking about is now building a structure inside of that structure. This is strictly from the inside out. It's your own structure. It's what you will do when nobody else is looking, and nobody's going to give you a pat on the back. You're not going to get paid for it. This is you doing it because you want to do it. And if you're doing it for any other reason, if you are looking for a pat on the back, either by somebody else or by God or by anyone, then it's not going to give you what you're looking for. Well, it may give you what you're looking for if what you're looking for is a pat on the back. But it's not going to take you along the spiritual journey that we're talking about. And there's a real reason for that. As we create this structure, what we're actually doing is creating the habitus. And I had this all set up, and now, of course, for some reason, it is no longer on the page that I wanted it on. No, it's dead. Okay. So the habitus, you were asking, Jim. A habitus is a habit of being. It is a habit of being. For ancient peoples, they were so connected to the land that they related themselves, their identity, everything focused on the land. And so there was a habitat, the place in which you lived, and then your habitus is your ritualized perception of reality. It's the way you connect to the land, to the people within it, to your community. It's your perception of the way things are that is ritualized and shared by the community, called a habitus. We in the West don't have them anymore. We talk about not having rites of passage anymore, and we talk about all these things. Well, this is part of it. We don't have a way, a custom, a habitual way of connecting with our reality and with each other. The closest that we come maybe in liturgical churches would be the liturgy, but that's not really it either if it doesn't extend into all parts of our lives. I've talked about the Aborigines in Australia before, which is what this quote was going to be from, and dealing with their songlines and their ritualized way of dealing with the land and each other, their ancestors and everything that held them together. What we're trying to do is develop a habitus. We're trying to develop this ritualized way. We're creating the ritual. We're creating the structure. We're creating the habit or the way that we're going to do this. But it is going to be exactly that. It's how we're going to deal with the reality of our lives. It's how we're going to create a habitual way, daily way of being able to connect with God and with each other. So now if we take a look at the desert habitus of contemplative prayer, I want to read just that last 2 paragraphs on the page. So this is Belden Lane. It's the name of the book is A Solace of Fierce Landscapes. What a cool name, huh? And he's talking about the desert contemplative tradition. He says, but as he was trying to duplicate this in his own life, creating his own habitus, his own habit of being, he says, my own efforts at appropriating this habitus over the last several years have involved a regular nightly practice of desert prayer. Desert prayer would be contemplative prayer. It would be the prayer of the heart, wordless prayer. A routine participation in the liturgical life of a faith community. Okay, so he is doing his own prayer that he's doing nightly in his home, in his prayer closet. He's also participating in a church, in regular worship services. These are liturgical, so it would be one of those denominations. Periodic backpacking trips alone into the wilderness. So he's spending time alone in nature. Consistent work with an insightful spiritual director and a disciplined pattern of reading in the classics of the tradition. So those are several really good ways, and his ways of being able to establish a new habit of being for himself. Now he says, this may sound like a labor-intensive method for realizing certain paradigmatic desert experiences in my own practice. One might imagine that in pretending to be a desert monk in the city, my goal is to achieve particular states of desert consciousness. But the long-standing insistence of the tradition is that there is no experience, no achievement of consciousness to be sought in any of this. The desert practice of contemplative prayer abandons, on principle, all experiences of God or the self. It simply insists that being present before God in a silence beyond words is an end in itself. Strange sounding, I know. But this is what he's trying to get at. This practice that you're doing, if you're doing it in an ego-based way, that you're trying to achieve some accomplishment, some milestone, if you're trying to, like I was 25 years ago, be Thomas Merton, that's the wrong motivation for all this, and it's not going to get you where you want to go. To try to be somebody else or like somebody else, I suppose even if that somebody else is Jesus to a certain extent, we're trying to find ourself by abandoning self. We've said over and over that the spiritual path is much more like subtraction than addition. It's a letting go of things. So if you're still trying to bring in something from the outside, achieve an experience, achieve enlightenment, achieve some kind of higher consciousness, then you're back on the track of just achieving, accomplishing, acquiring. And the experience is going to be very different than that. You're going to be, if you are looking for that kind of achievement, you're going to be constantly disappointed in your prayer sessions and in the things that you have set yourself to do, because by and large, they're not going to deliver those kinds of things. They're going to be delivering at a different level, a subconscious level. And you will find that your advancement, your accomplishments, if you want to call them that, your growth is going to be something that you will perceive over time, and it will be sort of an indirect perception of it. It won't be a direct hit. It's not going to be that dopamine hit that we're all looking for when we click on the internet. It's not going to be like that. It's a very different thing. So what we're trying to do is reimagine this ritualized way of perceiving a reality, a way of creating a new customary, habitual way of being ourselves. All right? Take a look at those 3 points. He just expands on it a little bit. God is a desert whose fullness of glory is hidden from human sight, known only in an unknowing and risking of love. Do you see what he's saying there? God is a desert whose fullness of glory is hidden from human sight. Just like Moses, who couldn't see God. He wanted to see God, but God said no. In other words, we're not going to get him intellectually. We're going to know God in unknowing. We're going to know God in an embracing of the mystery, embracing a paradox, these sorts of things. And we're going to know him as we risk love ourselves, as we risk the vulnerability that love requires. In these ways, we're going to know God, but not the way that we commonly associate with knowing. especially as modern Westerners. Secondly, the self is a desert that must be stripped and made empty before God can be found at its center. So we're not going to be trying to develop ourselves. We're going to be trying to let go of ourselves. You know, I remember someone describing a movie actor as someone who has this love relationship with the camera that they always ignore. Right? A movie actor has to ignore the camera, pretend it's not there, and yet they're having this relationship with the camera. The camera is the means by which they are a movie actor, and they're always going to ignore it. The self is sort of the same way. We're going to have this relationship with self, but the way we're going to have the relationship is not to focus on it, it's going to be to focus away from it. It's interesting, and it's so slippery when you really think about it. The more you try to hold on to it, the more you're going in the wrong direction. And three, the realization of God's love at the heart of one's being is inseparably related to ascetical and liturgical performances, which are themselves suggested by desert experiences. So the realization of God's love at the heart of one's being is going to be part of ascetical, which is a stripping away, and liturgical, regular ritual practices that you're going to set up. This is not going back to the Catholic Church or High Lutheran or Episcopal. This is you, and this is what we're going to talk about next. What are the ritual, liturgical, or whatever practices that you're going to set up? That can be anything that you want it to be. It can be meditation, it can be centering prayer, it can be spoken prayer. It can be reading of prayers. You could read The Office, or you could read the Book of Common Prayer. It can be anything that speaks to you, anything that has meaning for you, anything that has depth for you. It can be just time in silence and solitude. It can be those nature walks. It can be runs in the morning. It can be going to the gym. It can be anything that you bring this kind of awareness to, this kind of presence to. Community participation, like we're doing now, or in church. Spiritual direction, if you pair off with a spiritual director and you go for one-on-one sessions. Devotional time, educational reading, journaling, exercise, all of the above. We have an array of ritual practices that we can do and we can bring to bear. It's up to us to choose them. It's up to us to experiment with them. Find out which ones really work, which ones don't work, what works in the context of the time that you have and when you're going to do it. How are we going to actually put this together? This is where the grid comes into play. You're going to have to really get probably intentional about this, especially at the beginning, and set a daily practice for yourself. This is your habitus. This is your habit of being. So the way they use the grid is, obviously it's got 7 columns for the 7 days of the week, and I put hash marks from 5 in the morning to 10:30 at night. And if this needs to be changed and adjusted to your schedule, I can, and you want to use this, I can give you the Excel file and you can change the times to suit. But 5 o'clock has been my target get-up time, especially when I was really working this. What you do first of all is you go through and you block out. Use a highlighter, use whatever you want. Block out all the set pieces in your week. So if you have a job, you're going to block out all of your work hours Monday through Friday, Saturday, Sunday, anything that you do at the same time, same day, every week. Just block them out. If you're always coming to church, and you should be at the effect, then you're going to block out from 10 to 12 or whatever that time slot is. And if you have meetings that you're going to regularly, you block those out. And anything else that would be a regular thing that you do every week at the same time, same day. Now, once you've got all that blocked out, now you look at the negative space. This is the space that you have to work with. You're going to probably want to focus on the early mornings because that's something that you can generally control. But if you're going to say, I'm going to get up an hour earlier, then you're going to have to look at your bedtime and say, how much sleep do I need? And be realistic about this. You know, if you need 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours of sleep, and you say you're going to get up at 5 in the morning, then do the math and then reset your bedtime so that you can actually have a chance of accomplishing this. So this is going to be getting right down into the weeds, down into the daily details of your life. When do I go to bed? When do I wake up? But if you think about it, if you went to a boot camp, if you went to any kind of retreat, that's what they're going to do, right? They're going to set for you a schedule. They're going to set for you a structure. This is you setting the structure for yourself. So be intentional about it. Say you're going to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. If you're supposed to be at work at 8, you're going to get up at 5:30 or 6. And you're going to do half an hour to 40 minutes, 45 minutes of some combination of things that you set for yourself. You're going to get up, you're going to get a cup of coffee, and you're going to sit down and you're just going to watch the light move in the backyard for half an hour and do centering prayer meditation, fine. Or you're going to get up and you're going to read from a daily devotional or from Psalms or whatever you're going to read. And you're going to read for 15 minutes and then you're going to just let yourself drift off into centering prayer or meditation for 15 minutes. It can be anything you want it to be. It can be a combination of journaling. When I was doing this, I would get up at 5, I was out the door by 5:15, and I would do my morning run, which is a combination of run and prayer time. And I always like to be starting off in the dark, so while I was running, I was actually watching the sun come up and watching it getting lighter and being completely aware of like the turning of the planet and the fact that I was part of the motion of something. It gave me the sense of motion to watch it be getting lighter. And by the time I got back, it was, if not dawn yet, at least it was fairly light. And then I'd sit by the pool. I was in an apartment at the time. I'd go and sit by the pool and I'd just do a cool down, which was a meditation time. And then I'd go back up into my room, and that would be, if I had something bubbling up, which I usually did, that was journaling time. Sometimes I'd sit down, I'd write. And then it was shower and ready to go. And then by 8 o'clock, I was ready to start working. So that was my general, it was like 2.5, sometimes 3 hours. It just depended on the day, how much writing I did or whatever. But that was my ritual, that was my habitus. It started to connect me even to the city, to the concrete jungle, in terms of being there at the turning of things, at that dawn time. And then of course there were things that I would do in the afternoon and the evening as well. Figure out what you can do. Don't set the bar so high that you're just setting yourself up for failure. So don't say you're going to get up at 5 o'clock 7 days a week and do this, that, and the other thing. Set yourself, maybe you're going to be able to do this 3 times a week, or you're going to start it 3 times a week. Or maybe you'll say every morning on the weekday I can get up an hour early and do half an hour, 45 minutes or whatever. Whatever you set yourself to do, write it down. And just the fact that you put it on paper, one of the hardest things is to draw the initiative out of yourself. That's the hardest thing, it seems like. But when you put it on paper and you tack this onto the fridge or onto the mirror in the bathroom or wherever you're going to put it, now it's something else telling you. So there's that phrase, plan the work and work the plan. You plan it, and now you just get up and do it. You don't have to think about it anymore. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to remember what it is you're supposed to be doing. You just get up and you do what the schedule tells you to do. So if it's 5 o'clock, it's 6 o'clock, you get up and you do this and you do that, and then you go to work, and then you go to the meeting, and then you do whatever it is you do. But you set this up, and you'll have a sense that every day you're pushing the ball a little further forward. You don't really know in what direction. You don't show up to any of these sessions with any sort of expectation. You just show up and you just be present and you let it unfold. And then you start to see what happens over time. And we'll talk a little bit, hopefully we'll have time, about the benefits of what's going on. But you get the point, get the way this works. And you may not need to be this formal. If you just know you're going to get up an hour earlier and you're going to do this and that, well, that's all you need, maybe. But see how much of this you might need in order to get it formal enough so that you actually are able to do it and pull it off. What is it that we've got? We've got 2 different ways that we're going to build this intentionality, going back to page 2 of 3. At 5C, offline intentionality. This is going to be what we were talking about now in terms of an early morning session, an early morning time, where we're offline to the rest of our day. We're going to carve out space, we're going to go into our prayer closet, and we're just going to go offline. We're going to engage in something. The Vipassana meditation we'll be talking about in the next class is the Buddhist follow the breath type of meditation. That's a specific technique. We're going to learn about it. We're going to learn about what meditation is and is not, and we're also going to practice it in this other class. That's one technique that you can do. It's geared the same way as centering prayer from the Christian tradition, which uses a different technique, the technique of the sacred word. but the intention is the same. Not to think deeply about something, contemplate it or meditate on it, and not to try to silence your mind completely, but to just step away. You're still aware of things happening around you, but you don't focus on any of them. So it's a very specific way of stepping outside of that egoic mind, stepping outside of that stream of consciousness that is so distracting and takes us away from the real center of being. So those are two ways, two techniques. But you can do exercise or you can do walking meditation. Some of us are just too ADD to be able to sit still for 20 or 30 minutes. Okay, if that's you, or if it's just not comfortable, or you need to do both anyway, then you can walk. The walking meditation, it can be completely non-exercise in the sense that you're just slowly walking maybe the perimeter of the backyard, or even the perimeter of a room, just scribing a circle and just slowly walking it. If you're familiar with a labyrinth, that's what a labyrinth is for. It's just this path you just follow, watch your feet and follow it. And because your body is doing something, it's maybe easier for you to just let go of the thought stream and step aside using whatever technique that you're using. When Frank and I went to the Desert House of Prayer, the way that we did the centering prayer is we all sat in a circle facing out. So the circle was there, we got our chair, and we all ritually turned it backwards and then sat facing away from each other. And then at the end of each session, we did this ritual walk around the room, just a slow kind of meditational walk. That was their habitus. That was their way of doing it. You'll create your own. But know that you can do that. Know that's fine. If you want to go to the gym and get on a machine, bicycle or a treadmill or whatever, and once you get the rhythm and you get going, just stare at a point on the wall and go into your meditational mode. That's possible. Rosary, prayer beads, probably no one in here is going to want to pick those up. But that's what they're for. The rosary, so misused as Catholics when we were, because we thought we had to accomplish it. We had to say the decades. We had to do what we had to do, right? And on pain of death. But really, it's just another mindless activity to give the monkey brain so that it goes, sits and eats a banana and allows you to be able to be present. So they're a time-honored way of accomplishing the same thing. Our worship and devotional time and prayer time is also, whether it's corporate or whether it's alone. You're going to be doing that here musically, or here if we're doing corporate prayer or something, but you can do that on your own. People are always telling me that they're listening to worship music either in the car or in the home or whatever. We want to practice some silence and solitude, but there's a time for that as well. Put on the earbuds and just go into that mode as you would if you were at church. So that's another thing. And worship music being as simple as it is, which used to drive me crazy when I first started it because I needed to jazz it up. But it's so simple. The idea is that you hear it once and you can sing it. You don't have to keep your mind so active anymore. Again, it's a way of giving the mind, the active mind, the monkey brain, the banana, let it go quietly eat on another branch so that you can be over here and playing with God. That's the idea. So those can also be possible tools, ways for you to build your ritual way of habitually coming to God in this silent way. Online intentionality. These would be the mindfulness exercises that we'll also go through in the next class. Actually working on becoming mindful, doing specific exercises to try to teach ourselves how to really be aware of what's going on around us, really be present. And this is all throughout the day, not just at certain times. This intentional awareness, this choice to be aware, simply leaving people better than you found them. Having that in the forefront of your mind. So each person you meet, the question in your mind is, how do I leave this person better than I found them? Maybe it's just to smile at them. Maybe it's just to say hi. Maybe it's to hand them a $20 bill. I don't know. You will figure it out in the moment. There's no pat answer to this. But you being completely present to the situation, seeing them where they actually are, perceiving the need of what is there, you'll make that choice. But that's also being mindful, because we can only make the correct choice, a correct choice, if we're actually there and actually present and actually mindful. The Jesus prayer is something that Christians have used for thousands of years as well. Lord, have mercy on me. Jesus, have mercy on me, a sinner. Those type of short one-line prayers are prayers that early Christians would say sometimes hundreds of times a day. They would just keep saying it over and over again in their minds. It was doing a couple of things. It was at once bringing them back to center, bringing back to the present moment, but the repetition of it was also creating kind of a spiritual drone underneath. They said that after a while of saying the Jesus prayer in this way, the prayer was saying them. It became a way of just being, and so it kind of moved into a deeper place. But it was the training of the mind to be able to say this prayer over and over again. You can experiment with that and see if that works for you. If it seems too much like a mantra, maybe not. But these are just techniques that you can use and you can try both offline and online to get to the same place. And remember, your offline times are designed only to be able to perfect the ability to stay present throughout your day. Our goal is the continuous prayer that Paul talks about. How do we get there? These are ways that you can get there, both online and offline. Yeah.
And online would be doing what we have to do that involves others. I don't remember what you said.
Doing it all day long, during the course of your life. So it's while you're doing everything else you do. You're not carving out time and separating yourself from work or family or whoever to have this silence and solitude. You're incorporating it into your daily workflow, whatever you're doing. You're riding the bus, you're going to work, you're sitting here in this room right now, and you're bringing yourself back, you're staying present. So there's the mindfulness presence, and then there is the offline presence. And we can't do the meditational practices we do when we're offline when you're at work, or you'll be drooling in a corner. So that's not going to work for you. It's not going to get you paid. And so we're going to find other ways to be able to incorporate that kind of presence and mindfulness throughout the day. Journaling can be another great way. And I have a handout that we put together. I don't know if any of you actually got that series of email messages that we were sending out a while back. That was kind of a primer on the effects approach to spirituality. One of the messages included the journaling handout, but I will repost that on the Facebook site. How many of you are on that Facebook site, by the way? I mean, I invited most. Is anybody not on it? But if anyone is not, see me afterwards so I can get you on. But I tried to invite every one of you that I could remember, or I had a Facebook page that I could find. But I'll put up there the journaling primer as well, and you might want to take a look at that, because this would be journaling, not, again, it's going to be done contemplatively. So when you're writing in your journal, it's not that you're thinking about who's going to read this or what you're trying to communicate to someone. It's just putting the pencil down on the paper or fingers to the keyboard, and as close to stream of consciousness as you can, as close to automatic writing as you can, just write. If you're doing it as part of this quiet time, that's usually the perfect time that a lot of things are bubbling up. If you do it when you come out of a dream, keeping a dream journal the same way, it's just writing what it was that you're thinking about or what happened in the dream. You're just writing whatever comes out. It doesn't have to be grammatical, it doesn't have to be full sentences. It can be just impressions, it can be phrases, it can be a single word. It's whatever comes out. That's what you just want to put down on paper. So you're still approaching this in a contemplative way, but just write. Just put it all down. There's something about putting it down on paper that's kind of like a burial at sea. You can kind of lay it down, and it doesn't have to spin in your head anymore. And you'd be amazed as you go back and read these things, and it's good to probably at least timestamp it, as you're reading these things. See the progression you made, or see where you're coming and going. There will be a shape to it that you're not planning, but it's there. It's really cool. So journaling is another great tool that you can use. And then, of course, reading. And there's devotional reading, and there's more what I'm calling here didactic reading. But you can be reading to understand more, reading to be taught, and then also just reading devotionally. So it'd be the difference between reading poetry, if you read some of the great mystic poets, or if you read Psalms, Proverbs, something like that. You could read devotionally. A lot of these daily devotionals are meant to be read devotionally and not so much to try to understand something, but also reading about the contemplative practice, from the hand. So I gave you a couple of possibilities here, but there's so many more that we could talk about. This book of ours is a collection, kind of like a devotional of writings by Thomas Merton that an editor put together. Intimacy with God, Invitation to Love, those would be more on the teaching side by Thomas Keating, to understand what's going on, especially psychologically, in Invitation to Love, of the practice of centering prayer, what it's doing to us, and how to accomplish it. New Seeds of Contemplation and The Way of the Desert would also be more didactic in their content. Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence, we read that in here a while back. And The Way of the Heart by Henry Nouwen. All good books to just kind of start to understand more and more about what it is you're doing and why you're doing it and where this is leading. It's kind of like the Belden Lane book, talking about him reading. Of course, he was going all the way back to the desert tradition, so John Cassian and Evagrius and so on and so forth, writers that he had read that you may not be so interested in. But these are more 20th century folks, except for, of course, Brother Lawrence, and see where they lead you. But there can be so many things that you can read, and it's your choice. Just start reading something. Incorporate that. So between the reading, between the journaling, the writing, between the prayer, both spoken prayer and wordless prayer, between exercise and meditational walking and even worship music or prayer beads, you've got this whole kind of smorgasbord of things that you can start to work with. Try some. See what works with you. Everything's not going to work equally. Everything's not going to work at the same time. You might try something that's working really well and then it falls kind of flat. So you can throw in something else. Let that run its course and then maybe try something else. At different times of your life, different things are going to speak differently to you. All of these are just tools. They are not spiritual in and of themselves. They hold no spiritual content. It's you bringing your presence to them that makes them sacred, because that's where we meet God's presence in the midst. So it's just a tool.
It's a lifestyle thing.
It's an absolute lifestyle change. Yes. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to change our lifestyle in these ways, which is going to change our entire perception. Remember, the habitus is a ritualized perception of reality. As we change and we get into these habitual forms, it's going to change our perception of reality. It's going to change the way we look at life and each other and so on and so forth. And then there's just stuff like gardens. Be a gardener. Be a bird lady. Be a bird feeder. Mary loves to go out there and feed the birds. I watch her from my office. I can see down when she's refilling the hummingbird feeders. And she just loves that. So you could probably say, when you're out there doing that, isn't it just this quiet, lovely time? And she's with the birds and the bird sounds and the sounds of the fountain, the water falling and all that stuff. You're a gardener. I know you've been doing a lot of that stuff. This becomes prayer time if you will see it that way. If you understand it that way. If you're going out there because you just got to mow the lawn and you hate mowing the lawn, well then that's going to be your reward in full. You'll have a mowed lawn. But if you go out there with this other mentality and you're smelling that fresh cut grass and you're part of nature and your feet are really in the soil. Miriam was just reading something, and I've heard this before. We can go 40 years without our feet ever touching the ground. We're in dielectric souls that don't even allow electrical grounding to take place. We move in our souls from one air-conditioned enclosure to another. And when do we ever just put our feet in the ground anymore?
Concrete walkways, you don't feel the ground anymore.
So get out there and get your hands in the dirt if that's what you like to do. If that's not your thing, well, there's other stuff. But think about those type of activities, the crafts, the sports, the hobbies that you do, to go and make a model and really have that kind of attention to detail and to be having that as your prayer time at the same time. When I was running early in the morning, there was a sense that I was hovering above myself and just kind of along for the ride. It wasn't an actual out-of-body experience, but it felt that kind of detached way where it's just a wonderful feeling. Artists, Sharon can probably tell you, you can get into a flow where it just feels like you can't make a mistake, whether it's music or actual visual arts, if it's photography, whatever it is you do, you can use that. That can be a part. But it needs to be something that you have a structure for and are disciplined to, and you're doing it on a regular basis. And you realize, this is part of my prayer. This is part of your body as a living sacrifice to God, if you will. This is where we're going with all of this. William, it was so funny when we went to lunch afterwards, and when we were pulling out, Marion and I, William's big old van thing was sitting right there, and he was standing in front of it just looking out over the valley. And it was really cool because I just saw you just kind of drinking in that scenery. And of course he parks that thing down by the beach and just has this kind of, festival with nature at times. That's a way that you can practice it. We all can find these ways. So it's not just this stuff that we perceive as religious activity. We are learning to move this out into all the nooks and crannies of our lives and everything that we do. And we're finding more ways to have those kinds of experiences, which is really, really important. Out of all of that you do, the community that you're bringing your whole presence to, and you're practicing all this online mindfulness activity with your offline, with all of your times with nature or whatever else you're doing, you're going to find tons of opportunities for service. And there's formal service and informal service. The formal times of service, that's fine. You can choose to be a sponsor, or you can choose to go volunteer at some missionary, deal or whatever it is you want to do. But I'm even less concerned with that and more concerned with a person who is just present enough and willing enough that when somebody shows up that needs help, that you can actually see what the help is that is needed and then have the wherewithal to be able to offer that. It's just being there when the moment presents itself and then doing what you do. So it doesn't have to be formal. And in fact, the formal can sometimes get us into trouble because this next point about ego and non-ego based, once again, are you helping someone even unconsciously, subconsciously, in a way to get the pat on the back, to get the recognition as a helper, someone who's really doing good things? It's like the philanthropist who gives in order to be able to, be acknowledged and rewarded. Or is it something that you're really doing in a way that nobody else sees? And not even that you're thinking about that. There's going to be the formal and the informal. You should be available for both. But the whole thing is all geared toward just meeting a need that you have perceived. And it doesn't go any further than that. It begins and ends and has all its being in this moment right here. There is no outcome. There is no means to an end. It's just happening now. And this other point here, got to make sure that you're not moving into codependency land. You're aware enough that you're actually providing what love requires and needs, but you're not, again, doing it because you need to receive something, which is the definition of codependency. If you need someone to be your friend, if you want to be recognized, then that's a codependent kind of relationship. This is just giving for the sake of giving because there is a need that you have perceived. And you also need to know when not to help, which is the way of helping as well. Okay, so there's all these little caveats there. But again, just being willing as you move through life in an online way, the service is going to present itself. The opportunities will present themselves as you just do all the stuff we're talking about. So it's all inclusive.
Dave?
Yes?
I want to just say that I went to a, I guess you'd call it a convalescent home, to pass out, I'm sorry, I'm losing it, ABAR information. And while I was there, the head of it offered me to come in and work with the patients. And, so I didn't expect that, and I'm already doing so many things. I'm thinking, I don't know how I fit that in. I guess I have to choose what I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it kind of surprised me. It was neat.
That's the way it's going to happen. You know, you show up with the kind of attitude that you will have, and people are going to be attracted to that. And doors will open and opportunities will present. Sometimes it'll be an actual job, you know, and sometimes it'll just be volunteer. But it's just going to feed on itself in the positive way. Remember we were talking about broken windows last Sunday? You know, if you don't tend to the broken windows in your life, it creates an environment for more of the same. So if there are visible signs of disorder, you're going to get more disorder. If there's visible signs of crime, you're going to get more crime and greater crime. But if there are visible signs of exactly what we're talking about here, presence, connection, willingness, that's going to create the environment for more of the same. And it's going to change everything. Taking care of all these little details. And every one of these is an unspectacular, very mundane, little detail that you're going to tend to. You're going to get up, it's on your grid, you're going to do it in its order, no one's going to see it, no one's going to pat you on the back, no attaboy, no attagirl. But as you do these things, it's creating this new environment from the inside out that is going to be visible to everyone that you meet. Your blast radius is going to become a love radius. I'm starting to sound like John now, But that's what's going to change. And it's going to pull these kinds of things in and open up doors in ways that you just can't even imagine. It just changes everything, the way that you look at life, right?
If one has, undealt with situations, and maybe a lack of having worked the steps for quite a while, like I've done. And then I do all these things that you're suggesting, which I want to do, will be the other part of that interfere with what the things I'm doing that you're suggesting?
Shouldn't. It shouldn't. That's really up to you. You're going to have to, you work out what your habitus looks like. You work out your program. If it's going to include step work, if it's going to include work with a program, with a sponsor, then great. That's all on your grid too. And so you make sure, and as you set this up, you make sure that you leave time. You leave negative space. There's got to be time for repose and just offline. You got to watch TV once in a while. Hey, watch a movie, and eat and sleep and do all those things. So you're not going to pack this thing so tightly that it becomes stressful. It becomes another burden to carry. If you get to that point, you realize that you've gotten out of balance. And so then you just back off. But keep a pressure on this. Keep an intentionality to it. It's going to take active effort, especially at the beginning, to change your habits. I mean, that's just basic, right? So it'll feel like you're doing it at first, and then just like the Jesus prayer, after a while, it's doing you. There's going to be a flip that'll take place. Okay, I know I'm going through this real fast. We got about 10 more minutes. Let's go to page 3 of 3. What's the effect? What's the benefit? What's the sizzle? What's the pop? What do I get from all of this stuff? I broke it down into 3 areas. There's behavioral effects, psychological effects, and spiritual effects. The behavioral effects of an ongoing contemplative lifestyle, this habitus we're talking about, is first of all, is a growing awareness. I've said so many times in here that the only tools that we have to change ingrained behavior and thought patterns is awareness and opposite action, right? Opposite action, it's consistently doing the opposite of whatever the trigger would tell you to do. So if you're depressed and the trigger is to isolate, then you're going to engage. If the trigger is anger and it causes you to lash out, you're going to either withdraw or you're going to kill them with kindness, or you're going to do something else. You can't make the choice for opposite action unless you're aware in real time at the moment that you are being triggered and that you do have a choice. Because when you're in the midst of that, it doesn't feel like you have a choice. The train has left the station and you're just doing whatever the knee-jerk response is. But to have awareness and opposite action, as you practice awareness offline and online, this growing awareness just bleeds over into every part of your life. So that you are the type of person who in real time can always make a decision for the greater good of everyone who's in your blast radius, right? So that a growing awareness is going to be something that's of primary importance. I think 90% of the spiritual journey is just presence and awareness anyway. everything that you can think of really that are ritual practices in religious organizations or religious traditions is about awareness building. It's about presence. It's about becoming here now. And there's a reason for that. Seeing significance in the insignificant things, living those daily details. More and more, you won't be skipping over the moments of your life, waiting to get someplace else. You'll see the significance now, a direct corollary to, a direct byproduct of awareness and presence. That idea of broken windows we just talked about. The willingness to risk vulnerability, behaviorally. Willing to put yourself back out there, even after you've been hurt. To say that you're going to love again, to continue to leave a trail of breadcrumbs back. I was just talking to a mother this morning who's been hurt so terribly by a grown daughter, and what does she do? Well, is she willing to keep a steady drip of communication out to her daughter, but in a way that expects nothing in return? That's really hard to do, because the daughter is just not capable of a reciprocal relationship right now, going through too much herself. But is she willing to keep risking, put her heart out there just enough? That doesn't mean you don't draw boundaries. That doesn't mean that you don't, start detaching with love, to use Al-Anon speak. But to keep a part of your heart tender, to keep it out there, to keep risking again. And maybe not just with this particular relationship, but the next one and the one after that. To continue to risk love. Remember what Belden Lane wrote. He said, that's how we know God, in the willingness to risk love. To put ourselves out there into the unknown, into that vulnerable place, and see what happens. And when we do get burned, to get right back up on the saddle and do it again, and do it again. Your ability to do that becomes greater and greater because you know who it is really in your back pocket. This good news of Jesus, this God that loves the way God loves us, no matter how many times we get hurt, we still have that going for us. We still have that in our back pocket. Spending time with God in this wordless, contemplative space is informing us more and more about who we're really dealing with, which gives us the ability to trust enough to risk what love requires risking. All of this is part and parcel to the awareness. And it changes our choices. It changes our behavior patterns. We are willing to go back. New immersive attitude and way of living the moments. We talked about that. You're going to see life differently. You're going to choose differently. Right? You're going to experience things differently. And the ability to see and live the middle way between the extremes, between absolute mindsets and beliefs. So much of us, just look at the Twitterverse, are living these absolute extremes where they are right and everybody else is wrong, or at least the other side's wrong. And there's this polarity that allows for no connection, no conversation, no dialogue. We're going to be able now to live in that middle way. We're going to be able to actually love the enemy, as Jesus tells us, because it's going to be a connection point. And so all our behaviors are going to start to move as we practice this. Not right at the beginning, but over time. And not even in a way that we're noticing the change necessarily. Like I said, others will notice a change before you do, and you will realize it maybe a little bit after the fact. Psychological effects. Keating talks about, and of course a lot of psychologists have talked about emotional programs for happiness and how they drive your thoughts and your behaviors. So because of the traumas and the hurts of the past, we have learned to survive through them by putting in place emotional programs of which we're not even aware. They're way down in the subconscious. But that's what's driving the bus. Not your conscious thinking, not what you say you believe. It's those subconscious programs for happiness. They're really driving the bus. They're causing you to choose and do what you do. We're going to be able, like psychodynamic therapy. In fact, I think that the process of centering prayer and the process of contemplative life takes you through an organic process that's kind of like psychodynamic therapy, which is all about revealing the unconscious content, what's down there, what's really driving the bus, building the self-awareness that you need, the understanding of the influence of the past on the present, and making different choices. So it's going to be a combination of psychodynamic and cognitive behavioral therapy all in one go. And all you have to do is two things. Show up for community and create structure and adhere to it. You do those things and you become willing to deal with the service that presents itself, and all this stuff is happening. So it gets very simple. We say again?
I'm glad you reiterated just two things.
Just two things. See, all of this, at the end of all of this, you can forget everything I said except two things. All right? Because that's all you got to do. Make sure that you have created and are maintaining your community in all the little groups that they have. And that you are showing up present to those groups, those people, in a way that allows you to really be present, open, and seeable. They can see who you really are. And you have invited them in reciprocally to be accountable. Do that, and then create this structure that you adhere to, that you're disciplined to. Those two things. All this other stuff, like Jesus said, seek first the kingdom and God's righteousness, and everything else will be added. That's exactly what we're doing with community and structure, right? And then the last thing, the spiritual effects. Knowing God in an experiential, not intellectual or religious way. We're going to know God in the Hebrew sense of having that ongoing familiarity, that connection. We're going to have the ability to embrace paradox. We're not going to have to always resolve it, figure it out, have some kind of intellectual answer. We're going to be able to embrace the unknowing, and especially the uncertainty as a definition of faith. So often we think that faith is the opposite of uncertainty. Faith is the opposite of doubt. And nothing could be further from the truth. If you're not experiencing doubt or uncertainty in your life, then you're not experiencing faith either. Because faith is the ability to continue to choose and act in the presence of the uncertainty or the doubt, as if what you say you believe is really true. That's faith. We will be able to do that spiritually. Seeing everyone, everything as connected. Richard Rohr, everything belongs, right? Everyone, everything is connected. Everything is a part of God's love. It doesn't go into us and them. Even if it's Trump supporters, you'll still see them as us, right? Because it's not going to be separate camps that are always in opposition, separate camps with a zero-sum game where I am going to get mine out of the hide of this over here. It's not going to be like that anymore because God's economy is so different. And you'll be able to see how this all connects. You'll be able to see how there really are unlimited spiritual resources that will allow you and cause you to choose differently about your physical resources. You will handle them differently because you see that in the end, in the final analysis, you can't lose. You can't run out of the resources that you really need as a human being. You have a sense of identity. How can we know who we are if we are completely separated from the land that gives us our sense of being, like the Aboriginal peoples understand, or from this ultimate reality, this presence that we call God, that is the first cause and the glue that holds everything together? If we're standing, remember, electrically isolated from all of that, how in the world are we going to have a sense of who we are? We can only have a sense of identity in connection with this stuff that's greater than ourselves. Without that, you cannot have a sense of who you are. Ask Jesus who he was. I and the Father are one, was his answer. He described his identity in relation to the Father, always, and deeply connected. That's the way it's going to be for us. As we become more and more entrenched in our lives for real, this ultimate reality, we'll have a sense of who we are, because we'll have more sense of where we came from, what we're about, where we're returning to. And we will have and develop a non-religious, personal theology and conviction that becomes our core guiding principles. It's not going to be third person what somebody else told us. It's going to be a combination of that, but then run through our own hero's journey, our own rite of passage, our own experience. And so, as Jesus said, we're really building the house on the solid rock, not on the sand of hearsay. It's going to be ours. And once you have that, boy, it changes things, in terms of your ability, your confidence, your own conviction allows you to be more and more understanding, more and more tolerant, more and more able to embrace people who do not believe, who ultimately oppose you. To be able to love the enemy, to embrace the paradox becomes possible only when you have a sense of your own conviction driven really, really deeply. And that's what all of this is going to be driving us toward.
did.
You did.
And it's 6:03, but we didn't start till 6:05, so we
We could
I-
have been on time if it wasn't for
I know that was a drink from a fire hose, and I'm sorry about that. But if I did push record, which I think I did, it's on the recording, and this is something we can talk about. I encourage you, if you're part of that Facebook group and if stuff is occurring to you, throw it out to the group there. We can start to have the conversation there. We can have it here. We're still going to be meeting here, so we can talk. If you just want to talk to me personally about it, that's another part, actually connecting with people one-on-one and talking to them. Frank, he's steeped in all this stuff, and Marion, talk to us. Talk to each other. Just bang it about. But take the journey. The most important thing is that you actually put this into practice. And it doesn't matter how modest your habitus is as you start. It doesn't matter how small the structure is. Just be disciplined to it, and it will do its work, and you can grow from there. But just do something that you can will do, can and will do, and just keep doing it. Just show up and let the rest go. Don't even worry about the rest. Just show up. Okay? Well, let's break here. I'll talk to you in a second. Let's break here and get some food, because I see John is out there, and then we'll start again.